All right, so here on The Explainer, like we promised you, we're here with Madam President Faith Odhiambo, President of the Law Society of Kenya, to speak about the state of law and order in the country. And we invite you to give us your comments. The hashtag is The Explainer at Citizen TV Kenya. If you'd like to send us a text message, the number is 22422. Madam President, thank you for being with us on The Explainer tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Let's begin with, latest events. We thought maybe there was a slowdown in the abductions. We've heard assurances from the state and government. And just when we thought things were over or slowing down, then we saw the abduction of activist and businessman Mwabili Magodi in Tanzania again, and his release about 4 or 5 days later. Well, what's your reaction to this latest incident?
So first of all, let me just say thank you to all the advocates for their commitment to working together, and even in the East African region, us coming together in terms of challenges like this. So first of all, it's quite appalling and surprising, and also it reads into a very scary scenario that we're seeing in the region. It's like there's a tacit agreement in terms of the region of what is happening. People can walk in and walk out and pick up individuals, though he says that he was originally picked by the Tanzanian government and later on handed over to the Kenyan government, where he said he went through a more horrifying situation in terms of all his items were taken away when you crossed the border. Mm-hmm. And he was he got some beating, or would say some sort of torture was meted upon him. And even at a time that as a nation, we are hearing calls for, things to calm down and us to reevaluate and look at what's the way forward as a nation and as a country. It's quite sad to see that we're escalating even now across the border, that you're never safe. Yeah. Wherever you go, it seems like in the region, that we can't be assured of the safety of Kenyans, yeah, or our neighbors, so to speak. Because today, when you saw the case of Besigye, he's filed a case in Kenya through his advocate, seeking for certain constitutional declarations and compensation from Kenya. And so it's, it gets to a space that we have to agree as a nation where people will be able to express themselves. If we say the streets are not safe, people should not go to the streets, then where do you expect Kenyans to be able to articulate, to share, to be able to raise their concerns, and how will you expect them to engage with the government of the day? Because we demand that abductions must come to an end in our country. We are coming to a stage in our constitution that we should be getting some level of maturity as a nation and a country. But we're seeing a lot of pushbacks that in the Constitution 2010, we're still seeing abductions. And the problem now of the nature that it's taking is you don't know who will you hold accountable. Are you saying that because he says he feels the moment he crossed the border and he was handed over is when things even got worse? Mm-hmm. And so because even there was no stamping of his passport and eventually everything was taken away, so you cannot say where was he actually. Was he in Tanzania? Was he in Kenya where he got tortured? And how are we moving forward? Yeah. So as a country, I think there needs to be a lot of rethought and reset in terms of how our government wants to work with its people, because this is unsustainable, and it will create a situation where people are like a brewing pot waiting to explode. Because if you confine people and push people to the wall, that there's no way of them reaching out to you and talking to you, then you're only creating a recipe for disaster.
And we will talk a little bit more about, what happened in Tanzania with others as well. All of this has happened in just a short amount of time. And indeed, who we hold accountable and how we go about doing that. But I just want to sort of establish something else that's happening in the country. And you will have seen, we're witnessing acts of what some would term repression by the police. So several times now, they've stopped opposition leaders, government critics from having their meetings, including just this last Sunday when there was opposition leaders who were attempting to have a rally and, they were stopped from doing that. Isn't this in itself not a threat to law and order and the principles of rule of law? What are your thoughts around that?
Well, you know, it's funny that if you look at Article 243 and 244, which outlines the role of the National Police Service, it should be apolitical and uphold the highest standards of professionalism and including human rights standards as they do their work. Well, and yet we're seeing what we would ordinarily see in a repressive system of government, where the police will determine whether you want to assemble or not, yet the plain requirement is that you give a notification that you want to meet at this place at this time. And in actual sense, they ought to be providing security, because if they feel that their security concerns, they either notify them why they cannot have, or deploy, ensuring that there's security around that area in the event that they want to host and have. Because an apolitical National Police Service should not be saying these ones can host rallies and others can't, because we continue to see government, cabinet secretaries, the president and his team moving around the country and hosting, and we are seeing a lot of the empowerment that is going around the country. So if they can hold rallies, why can't the opposition hold rallies? And so it's a situation where the law should be applied equally to all parties. So if the police feel that there could be violence, let them ensure that they properly deploy and ensure that the police are there to ensure the safety of all citizens who want to engage and listen to what only the government has to say, but also what the opposition has to say.
And, you know, in that incident, and I think we're showing some of the footage on your screens, you know, opposition politicians claiming the police service is now getting sucked into partisan politics, and you've just talked about them being apolitical. MP Munyaka alleges that they made him shout the two-term slogan, you know, translating to either pro-government slogan or a pronouncement. You know, your thoughts on how the police are conducting themselves with respect to that?
Well, we've continuously called out the National Police Service, starting from their head in terms of their role and what they ought to do. And I think it's high time that even apart from holding command responsibility, that we start holding individual police officers accountable, because he's there as an individual. And so when he's violating the Constitution and also the police standing orders, I think the onus is now to hold them personally accountable. That's when it rings home that you are accountable to the rule of law and you must respect the decisions as is. And so unless we start seeing that, and I dare say that when we saw the case of abductions, that we had Justice Mugambi summoning then the acting IG, Masengeli, to court, and after ignoring seven demands for him to appear in court summons, the court gave custodial orders against him, which had not been done in quite a long time. And that forced him to come to court and apologize to the court. That's when it hit home that the courts actually have power. And so I think that it's high time that we start holding individual police officers accountable, and that the courts exercise judicial courage to issue certain stern orders, so that we see now more police being adherent to the rule of law.
My final question before we take a break. Explain to us in the law, would there be any circumstances under the law that would allow the police to block an opposition gathering, you know, as we saw on Sunday and previously, to block protests? Because now you're the legal mind, so help us understand, would there be instances where the police would, by law, be allowed or forced to block a gathering of the public?
Well, I don't want to anticipate what the police would have been thinking, but I would say that unless they have credible evidence or information that there's violence or there's a possible riot or there's going to be destruction of property, which I'd say those will be a lot of conjectures on their part, is when they can say that they're stopping a possible gathering, or they could be at an attack on that particular area and they're trying to safeguard the safety. But, you know, if notice was given in terms of they were informed there's going to be a gathering, I don't see any reason or excuse they ought to be giving, because the role of the police is to provide security and ensure security is upheld. So why not instead of these games that we're seeing, ensure that you deploy, raise concerns to them in terms of what they think if any particular area is a hotspot, have a discussion with those leaders so that at the end of the day, the police have done their part. They've ensured they've tried to secure. But this element of trying to enforce and showing force that you're blocking opposition leaders, it shows a tangent that you have already decided that you're siding with a certain political rhetoric, which the whole aim of making the National Police Service independent was to pull it away from what it was known during the Moi era, that the police were appendage of the executive. And sadly, this is what we are seeing.
Let's take a break. We have much to talk about with you, including the role of IPOA, what's happening in the country, and that use of terrorism or anti-terrorism charges on protests. We know you issued a strong statement recently. We'll be talking a lot more about that and where we go from here. Stay with us here as we speak to the president of the Law Society of Kenya, Faith Odhiambo, here on The Explainer. We're taking a break. We will be back with more with her here on the program.